All right, this breaking news. Sources tell CNN that Deputy FBI Director Dan Bongino has told people that he's considering resigning amid a major clash between the FBI and DOJ over the continued fallout from the release, or lack thereof, of the Jeffrey Epstein memo.
All right, so I don't know shit about fuck, but what I do know is that this is making major headlines this week, all in regards to the DOJ's memo, basically stating that there is no client list for Jeffrey Epstein. And they believe that Jeffrey Epstein did commit suicide, which we all know is not true. For those of you who don't know Dan Bongino, he's a former Secret Service agent, NYPD officer, and a prominent figure in politics. He also runs his own podcast as well, called The Dan Bongino Show. Pam Bondi is a former Florida Attorney General, now currently the U.S. Attorney General, and she's gained a lot of attention for her tough on crime stance and loyalty to Trump. But obviously right now she's facing a lot of backlash for her handling of these Epstein files. It's reported that Dan Bongino did not show up to work, most likely frustrated with the DOJ and their announcement. Here's CNN touching a little bit on it.
CNN senior justice correspondent Evan Perez is also with us. And so, Evan, is it your understanding that if Bongino were to resign, it's as a result of the infighting, including with the AG, Pam Bondi, or is it mostly over the disappointment of these Epstein files either not existing or not being released?
Well, look, I think Fred, there's a larger issue here, and I think, you know, if you look at Dan Bongino, he was a very successful podcaster. He had a very big following online, certainly very financially successful with his podcast that was a very strong appeal inside MAGA world. And this job really hasn't been, I think, very much fun. And if you've seen him doing some of his interviews in right-leaning media and conservative media, he has said as much. He has said that this job is taking a toll on his life, on his personal life, with his family. He's having to essentially be separated from them while he's here in Washington doing this job. It's not nearly what he's used to back in the days, obviously. He is someone who came from law enforcement. So, you know, I think there's a bigger story here in terms of what Bongino is thinking. But I certainly think part of what Caitlin laid out just now is partly the story here, and that is that there is some daylight between top FBI officials and top Justice Department officials over the handling of this Epstein matter. You'll remember that back in February, the Attorney General Pam Bondi led this event at the White House where they brought in all these MAGA influencers, these conservative influencers on social media, and gave them, with great ceremony, these binders that were supposed to contain these Epstein files. Turns out, though, most of the files were actually out there for years. And so it was a great embarrassment both to Bondi and to FBI officials who really didn't have much role in this. And so that's where some of this begins and where you see some of the distance. And so we'll see how this plays out in the coming days and weeks. We don't know whether Bongino is coming back to work next week. It appears he's taken the day off. He's down in Florida somewhere. And so we don't know whether he's going to be back to work next week. But we certainly know that this is not a story that is going to go away because, as Caitlin pointed out just now, certainly MAGA world is not done with this. They want more, and they want to see more from those documents that the FBI still has.
So I've only heard Dan Bongino speak a few times. I've also heard his testimony at the congressional hearing over the assassination attempt on Trump. And to me, he seems like someone who genuinely cares about the truth. He's very outspoken, very passionate, and isn't afraid of doubling down on what he believes in. But regardless of your party alignment, I believe the majority of Americans want justice. And we know that this memo by the DOJ is complete BS. One person even commented asking, why is Ghislaine Maxwell in prison if there is no evidence? A very valid question. Now, in the next clip, you'll hear a Fox News reporter stating how many victims of Jeffrey Epstein there are, all coming from Pam Bondi.
I can imagine that the job must be quite difficult for Bongino in that position that he has found himself in. But I have to ask, though, for so many who do want to see more justice, who are not satisfied that only one person has been held to account, for Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. That's, of course, Ghislaine Maxwell. She's serving a 20-year prison sentence. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. People cannot be satisfied that only one person has been prosecuted, convicted, and is now in jail. They think there should be more. Why do they think that?
Well, I think that there's something that the DOJ head has to answer to, and by that I mean Pam Bondi, in the fact that we have seen from court filings over the years that there's been alleged to be dozens of victims of Jeffrey Epstein. Flash forward to some comments that Pam Bondi made earlier this year. She said that some of the victims were in the range of 200 to 250. And what's more is this memo that came out, this unsatisfying 2-page memo that didn't deliver much other than the video evidence that we saw from the jailhouse and some additional writings on the department's findings, was that there are 1,000 victims of Epstein, according to what this memo was saying. And so when you look at the sheer number there, not just the sheer number, but the discrepancy from the court filings to what was said earlier this year to the 1,000 that we just got, it's perplexing to people that there would be this number of victims, but not a single additional person that could be charged or prosecuted from it. It doesn't make sense to anyone who looks at this. And it's going to be something that people will not probably be able to rest, because it just defies logic to so many people looking at the situation. So there's a lot of common agreement among online users, people in the public, about discrepancies like this. And so I think that there is going to be continued questions of main justice. And I think that those questions should be asked.
Having said that, and what Pam Bondi stated back in February, that the Jeffrey Epstein list is sitting on her desk to be reviewed, it's clear where the frustration is coming from. She's teased this for months now, and yet we have no one being held accountable aside from Ghislaine Maxwell. Last thing I'll note here, and you've probably already heard this earlier, is how Dan Bongino has been shaken up by this whole thing. Let's give this a listen.
There's a lot of pressure on this FBI based on the promises that they've made. And if you even look back to some of the interviews that Bongino did earlier this year, when he was telling Fox News about the fact that there is no evidence to suggest that otherwise, that Epstein didn't kill himself, he looked shaken up by that. He looked almost distraught that he had to deliver that information to the public. And he even said that, he's, I'm paraphrasing, that he's, sitting behind his desk in these four walls every day, separated from his wife, and almost indicating that there's, a lot of pressure that he's facing in this. Yeah. So when you get down to the core elements here, it's almost like you see a lot of pressure, like you're saying, online about this, about anger against Pam Bondi. But looking at what is the role of the FBI, it's to deliver goods to the DOJ. And the DOJ is often the one disseminating what comes from that, or bringing prosecutions from that. And I think that we're definitely not going to just, close up this Friday and see this story eventually disappear. I think that there's going to be continued ongoing discussions about this going forth, and I don't think it's going to get swept under the rug.
It shouldn't be swept under the rug. Bongino has been vocal about this for years now, and in his new FBI director role, it's taken a toll on his life, being separated from family while working in Washington. So him going into this position to expose the files and being ordered to cover it up must be daunting to him. All his time being spent on this story and being away from family, and now being told not to do his job, yeah, I'd be frustrated too. If he really wants to save his integrity, then maybe it is best if he resigns. It would suck to lose somebody like him, but Americans want answers, not cover-ups. All this fighting must mean that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and hopefully we can get the answers that we were promised. Let me know what you think in the comments. Should Bongino resign? Should Trump replace Pam Bondi with someone more competent? Or is there more to this memo than we're being told? Let me know what your thoughts are, and you guys take care.